the forgotten wife. A biblical mystery unveiled. What if one of the most righteous men in the Bible married a pagan? Joseph, the dreamer and interpreter of dreams, the man who rose from the pit of betrayal to the palace of power, the same Joseph who saved a nation during famine, forgave his brothers, and became the embodiment of divine favor. Yet there's one element of his story that remains shrouded in mystery and rarely discussed in religious circles: his marriage to Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. The biblical text is tantalizingly brief. Genesis 41:45 states, Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. This single sentence raises profound questions that have puzzled scholars, rabbis, and theologians for centuries. Why would a devout Hebrew patriarch chosen by God marry into idolatry? Was Joseph compromised by Egyptian culture? Was Asenath converted from her pagan ways? Or is there something far more complex, perhaps deliberately hidden, in this seemingly straightforward marital arrangement? The implications are staggering. From this union came Manasseh and Ephraim, who would become two of the most influential tribes of Israel. These sons, born to a woman described only as daughter of a pagan priest, would carry the covenant blessing forward, their descendants forming the backbone of the northern kingdom of Israel. How could such pivotal figures in Israel's history emerge from a seemingly forbidden union? To understand this mystery requires us to embark on a journey, not just through ancient texts, but through the hidden corridors of history, through midrashic interpretations, and through apocryphal writings long buried in time. It demands that we examine evidence that spans cultures and centuries. It calls us to look deeper than the surface narrative, to question what we thought we knew, and to consider remarkable possibilities that challenge conventional understanding. Archaeological discoveries at Heliopolis, the Greek name for the Egyptian city of On, have revealed fascinating context. In 2017, excavations uncovered royal statues and artifacts dating precisely to the period when Joseph would have risen to power, showing the grandeur and religious significance of this city where Asenath was raised. Among these finds were fragments bearing both Egyptian hieroglyphics and ancient Semitic markings, physical evidence of cultural interactions between Egyptians and Hebrews that align remarkably with Joseph and Asenath's story. To fully grasp the significance of this union, we must first understand Joseph's extraordinary rise to power. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and imprisoned unjustly, Joseph's trajectory changed dramatically when he interpreted Pharaoh's disturbing dreams. Genesis records Pharaoh's astonishment. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? In a breathtaking reversal of fortune, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister, second only to Pharaoh himself. It was at this pivotal moment, as Joseph stood poised to implement his plan to save Egypt from devastating famine, that Pharaoh gave him Asenath as wife. This was no casual arrangement. In ancient Egypt, marriage was a powerful political tool, often used to secure alliances and strengthen the position of key officials. By giving Joseph the daughter of a high priest, Pharaoh was doing more than rewarding a loyal servant. He was integrating Joseph into Egypt's power structure, legitimizing his authority through connection to the religious elite. But this political dimension creates a profound tension. The same Joseph who had steadfastly maintained his Hebrew identity through years of slavery and imprisonment, refusing to compromise even when it cost him dearly, now appears to accept a marriage that seemingly contradicts everything he stood for. The Joseph who had fled from Potiphar's wife rather than sin against God now marries the daughter of a priest dedicated to the worship of Ra, the sun god. This apparent contradiction has troubled religious scholars for generations. What if the traditional understanding is incomplete? What if this marriage, far from being a compromise of Joseph's faith, was actually part of a divine plan with implications reaching far beyond Joseph's lifetime? What if Asenath herself was not who she appeared to be? Three intriguing theories have emerged over centuries of scholarly debate, each offering a different perspective on who Asenath truly was. The first, derived from ancient Jewish midrash, suggests that Asenath was not Egyptian at all, but was in fact the daughter of Dinah, Joseph's own niece, born after Dinah's tragic rape by Shechem. According to this tradition, the infant Asenath was abandoned by her mother's family due to the circumstances of her birth, only to be miraculously transported to Egypt and adopted by the childless priest Potipharah and his wife. A second theory proposes that while Asenath was indeed raised in an Egyptian household, she underwent a profound spiritual transformation, rejecting the polytheistic religion of her upbringing to embrace Joseph's monotheistic faith. This view is supported by an ancient apocryphal text known as Joseph and Asenath, which describes in vivid detail Asenath's dramatic conversion experience, including a mystical vision that confirmed divine approval of her union with Joseph. A third, more controversial theory has recently emerged based on linguistic analysis of ancient texts and fragmentary evidence from Qumran. This theory suggests that Asenath may have been connected to a community of early monotheistic Egyptians, followers of a short-lived religious movement influenced by earlier Hebrew contacts that worshipped a singular creator deity rather than the traditional Egyptian pantheon. If true, this would cast the marriage in yet another light, as an alliance between two monotheistic traditions rather than a crossing of religious boundaries. The name Asenath itself offers intriguing clues. Professor Jonathan Miller of Hebrew University notes that while traditionally interpreted as Egyptian, the name bears striking similarity to Hebrew constructions, possibly meaning belonging to her father or dedicated to God. This linguistic ambiguity mirrors the identity questions surrounding this mysterious woman. These competing theories reflect more than academic curiosity. They reveal our deep discomfort with ambiguity in sacred narratives, and our desire to reconcile apparent contradictions. More importantly, they point to the possibility that the story we thought we knew has hidden dimensions that, once revealed, could transform our understanding not just of Joseph and Asenath, but of the very nature of faith, identity, and belonging in both ancient and modern contexts. The City of the Sun, Asenath's world unveiled. To understand the enigma of Asenath, we must first step into her world. A dazzling metropolis of gold-capped temples, scholarly wisdom, and ancient religious power. Heliopolis, the City of the Sun, as the Greeks would later call it, or On in Egyptian, was no ordinary place. It stood as the spiritual heartbeat of ancient Egypt, a city whose very existence was dedicated to the worship of Ra, the sun god, who symbolized the highest divine power in the Egyptian pantheon. Recent archaeological excavations have revealed the breathtaking grandeur of Heliopolis during the period when Joseph and Asenath would have lived there. Massive obelisks, some standing over 70 feet tall, reach toward the heavens, their gold-capped peaks designed to catch the first rays of the morning sun. At dawn, these monuments would blaze with golden light, a daily miracle that reinforced the power of Ra to thousands of devoted worshippers who gathered in the temple courtyards below. This was not merely a place of worship. It was the embodiment of Egypt's cosmic understanding, where heaven and earth met in spectacular architectural form. Standing in Heliopolis, writes Egyptologist Dr. Aidan Dodson, would have been like standing at the center of the universe for an ancient Egyptian. This was where creation itself was believed to have begun, the primeval mound from which the sun god first emerged to create all life. As the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, Asenath would have occupied an extraordinary position in this sacred landscape. Her father wasn't merely a religious functionary. He was among the most powerful and respected figures in Egyptian society. The priests of Heliopolis were not only spiritual leaders but also astronomers, mathematicians, and keepers of sacred knowledge. They calculated the flooding of the Nile, predicted celestial events, and maintained the complex religious calendar that governed Egyptian life. Potipharah, whose name literally means "he whom Ra has given," would have led processions through the Avenue of Sphinxes, conducted elaborate rituals in the inner sanctums of the temple, and served as an advisor to Pharaoh himself. His residential compound would have been a place of luxury and learning, with gardens, private shrines, and libraries of papyrus scrolls containing wisdom accumulated over centuries. What would life have been like for Asenath in this setting? Unlike most women in the ancient world, the daughter of a high priest would have received an exceptional education. She would have been literate in hieroglyphics, knowledgeable in religious texts, and trained in the ceremonial duties expected of a priest's daughter. Historical records from the period show that some daughters of Egyptian priests even served as gods' wives, or priestesses themselves, participating in sacred rituals and temple administration. The daily rhythm of Asenath's life would have been marked by religious observances, the morning greeting of the sun, the midday offerings, and the evening rituals when Ra descended into the underworld to battle the serpent of chaos before being reborn the next day. This cosmic drama, enacted through elaborate ceremonies, shaped the worldview of every Egyptian, particularly those in the priestly class. Her clothing would have reflected her status: fine linen robes, perhaps adorned with gold thread, jewelry bearing sacred symbols, and perfumes made from the finest ingredients imported from distant lands. Archaeological finds from noble houses of this period reveal exquisite cosmetic containers, mirrors of polished bronze, and jewelry of gold inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian, all items a woman of Asenath status would have possessed. Into this world of ancient splendor and polytheistic devotion stepped Joseph, a Hebrew slave risen to unprecedented power, yet fundamentally an outsider to Egyptian religion and culture. The collision of these two worlds creates the central tension of our story. How could a devout monotheist, faithful to the God of Abraham, find common ground with the daughter of a priest dedicated to sun worship? Political marriages were common practice in ancient Egypt. Pharaohs frequently cemented diplomatic alliances through marriage, and high-ranking officials were often given brides from noble families to strengthen their position in court. The discovery of the Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence from Egypt during the 14th century BCE, provides detailed accounts of such arrangements, including the extensive Egyptianization process foreign brides underwent, changing their names, adopting Egyptian customs, and embracing new religious practices. When Pharaoh gave Asenath to Joseph, he was following this established pattern. By connecting his new vizier to one of Egypt's most prestigious religious families, he legitimized Joseph's authority in Egyptian eyes and integrated him into the existing power structure. From a political perspective, the marriage made perfect sense. It helped transform Joseph from a foreign advisor into a legitimate Egyptian official with familial connections to the priestly elite. But the spiritual dimensions of this union remain perplexing. Would Joseph, who had demonstrated unwavering commitment to his God even in prison, compromise by marrying into a family dedicated to idol worship? Would Asenath, raised in the sophisticated religious tradition of Heliopolis, abandon the faith of her ancestors to embrace the invisible God of a Hebrew former slave? The biblical text offers no direct answers to these questions, leaving a fascinating gap that has invited centuries of speculation. This gap becomes even more intriguing when we consider the charged meaning of intermarriage in biblical tradition. Later Hebrew law would explicitly forbid marriages with those who worshipped other gods. Deuteronomy 7:3-4 states, "Do not intermarry with them, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods." Yet here, in a foundational narrative, one of Israel's most righteous figures appears to do exactly that, with no divine rebuke recorded. The archaeological record offers tantalizing clues about cultural interactions between Hebrews and Egyptians during this period. Excavations at Tel el-Daba in the Nile Delta, identified by many scholars as the region of Goshen where the Israelites settled, have revealed a complex mixture of Egyptian and Semitic cultural elements dating to the Middle Kingdom period. Household items show hybrid styles, suggesting cultural exchange and adaptation rather than rigid separation. A particularly significant discovery came in 1976 when archaeologists unearthed a tomb from the period of Joseph containing both Egyptian religious symbols and distinctly Semitic artifacts, potentially indicating individuals who navigated both cultural worlds. Could Asenath have been such a person, someone with connections to both Egyptian and Hebrew traditions? The mystery deepens when we examine her name more closely. Asenath has been traditionally interpreted as Egyptian, possibly meaning belonging to the goddess Neith. However, linguistic analysis reveals potential Hebrew connections as well. Dr. Richard Hess of Denver Seminary has noted that the name contains elements that could be read in Hebrew as storage, asan, and gift, nut, intriguingly appropriate for the wife of the man who managed Egypt's grain storage and was considered a gift to the nation during famine. 3 theories. Unraveling Asenath's true origins. The biblical record presents us with a striking puzzle. A woman described simply as the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, becomes the mother of 2 tribes of Israel. This sparse description has given rise to 3 compelling theories about Asenath's true origins, each supported by different strands of evidence and each carrying profound implications for how we understand Joseph's story and the broader biblical narrative. Theory 1. Asenath as Dinah's daughter. The first and perhaps most dramatic theory emerges from ancient Jewish midrash, particularly in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, a collection of rabbinic interpretations dating back to the 8th century. According to this tradition, Asenath was not Egyptian by birth at all. She was the daughter of Dinah, Jacob's only daughter, born from Dinah's tragic rape by Shechem, as recorded in Genesis 34. The midrash tells a heart-wrenching tale. After Dinah's brothers Simeon and Levi massacred the men of Shechem in revenge for their sister's violation, Dinah gave birth to a daughter. The child, a living reminder of trauma and violence, was rejected by her uncles who demanded she be put to death to erase the shame. Jacob, however, could not bear to harm his granddaughter. Instead, he placed around the infant's neck a gold amulet inscribed with God's name and abandoned her beneath an Egyptian thorn bush, Seneh in Hebrew, potentially connecting to the name Asenath. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, an influential 2nd century Talmudic scholar believed to be the author of the Zohar, elaborates. That same day, the archangel Michael descended in the form of an eagle, carried the child to Egypt, and delivered her to the house of Potiphera. The childless priest and his wife raised the abandoned infant as their daughter, never knowing her true heritage. This theory resolves several theological problems. First, it ensures that Joseph did not actually marry a pagan Egyptian, but rather unwittingly married his own niece, a Hebrew by birth. Second, it preserves the idea of Israel's pure lineage by making Ephraim and Manasseh fully Hebrew rather than half Egyptian. Third, it creates a poetic completion to Dinah's tragic story, as her daughter ultimately returns to the family through marriage to Joseph. The emotional power of this narrative is undeniable. Imagine the moment, described in some versions of the Midrash, when Joseph first encounters Asenath and feels an inexplicable connection to her. Or consider the scene when Jacob meets his grandsons and, according to the tradition, notices they don't bear the mark of Abraham on their faces, only to have Asenath reveal her amulet and true identity, bringing the story full circle in a moment of dramatic recognition. However, this theory faces significant challenges. Most notably, the biblical text makes no mention of Dinah bearing a child after her rape. Additionally, the Midrash was composed centuries after the events it claims to describe, raising questions about its historical reliability. Critics argue that this narrative represents a later theological attempt to resolve the problem of Joseph's intermarriage, rather than a preservation of actual historical memory. Theory 2. Asenath as an abandoned Hebrew child. A second, related theory suggests that while Asenath was not specifically Dinah's daughter, she was nevertheless a Hebrew child abandoned in Egypt and adopted by Potiphera. This theory, found in variants of Midrashic literature and later rabbinic commentaries, provides a different explanation for how a Hebrew patriarch came to marry an apparently Egyptian woman. According to this tradition, Asenath was born to Hebrew parents living in Egypt even before Jacob's family arrived during the famine. Some versions suggest she was from the tribe of Levi, Jacob's 3rd son, left behind during an earlier migration to Egypt. Orphaned or abandoned during hardship, she was found and adopted by the childless priest and his wife. This theory finds potential support in the pattern of adoption seen throughout ancient Egyptian records. Papyri from the Middle Kingdom period document cases of Egyptian nobles adopting children, sometimes of foreign origin, particularly during times of famine when families could not care for their children. Archaeological evidence from Tel El Daba shows that Semitic peoples had established communities in the Nile Delta well before the traditional dating of Joseph's story. Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, the prominent 12th century Spanish commentator, favored this interpretation. arguing that it explained Asenath's apparently easy acceptance of Joseph's God. She was returning to her ancestral faith rather than converting to something entirely new. He pointed to her name as potential evidence, suggesting it contained Hebrew linguistic elements disguised within an Egyptian-sounding name. This theory offers a powerful emotional narrative about lost identity and rediscovery. Asenath, raised in the splendor of Egyptian priestly culture, but always feeling somehow different, finally discovers her true heritage through her connection with Joseph. It speaks to the universal human experience of searching for belonging and the profound moment of recognition when we discover our authentic identity. The weakness of this theory lies in its speculative nature. While adoption was certainly practiced in ancient Egypt, no direct textual evidence in the Bible suggests Asenath was adopted. Like the Dinah's daughter theory, it appears motivated primarily by theological concerns about Joseph marrying an actual Egyptian. Theory 3. Asenath as an Egyptian convert. The third major theory, and one that has gained significant scholarly support in recent decades, accepts Asenath as genuinely Egyptian by birth, but proposes that she underwent a profound spiritual transformation, rejecting her polytheistic upbringing to embrace Joseph's monotheistic faith. This view finds its most elaborate expression in the ancient text, Joseph and Asenath, a Jewish narrative dating from between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE. Though not included in the canonical Bible, this work was widely read in early Christian and Jewish communities, suggesting it reflected traditions considered meaningful by believers. The text presents Asenath initially as a proud Egyptian noblewoman who scorns the Hebrew Joseph despite his elevated position. However, after meeting him and witnessing his wisdom and devotion, she undergoes a dramatic change of heart. In a powerful scene, Asenath locks herself in her room for 7 days of fasting and repentance. She throws her Egyptian idols out the window, covers herself in ashes, and weeps bitterly over her former worship of dead and dumb idols. Her spiritual crisis culminates in a mystical vision of a heavenly messenger who gives her honey from paradise to eat as a symbol of her new life. The messenger declares, "Behold, from this day you will be renewed and formed anew and made alive again, and you shall eat blessed bread of life and drink a blessed cup of immortality, and be anointed with blessed ointment of incorruptibility." This vivid account portrays Asenath not as a passive recipient in a political marriage, but as a woman making a conscious, courageous choice to embrace a new faith, rejecting everything she had been raised to believe and risking her position in Egyptian society. The emotional and spiritual struggle depicted resonates with universal themes of conversion, transformation, and the courage required to embrace truth at great personal cost. Professor Ross Kramer of Brown University, author of When Asenath Met Joseph, argues that this narrative reflects historical realities of religious conversion in Greco-Roman Egypt. The text gives us insight into how ancient Jewish communities understood and processed the integration of converts, she writes. It creates a theological framework for accepting outsiders into the community of faith. Archaeological evidence lends potential support to this view. Excavations at Heliopolis have uncovered evidence of religious syncretism during the Middle Kingdom period, with some artifacts showing Egyptian artistic styles combined with Semitic religious elements. This suggests cultural and religious exchange was occurring, making Asenath's proposed conversion historically plausible within its context. Critics of this theory note that the Joseph and Asenath text dates from many centuries after the events it claims to describe, and may reflect later theological concerns about conversion rather than historical reality. Others point out that formal religious conversion as we understand it today was not clearly established in the patriarchal period. Evaluating the sources. The debate about Asenath's origins hinges largely on how we evaluate the various sources that inform these theories. None of them can be definitively proven based on the limited biblical text, so we must carefully assess the nature and reliability of supplementary sources. The Midrashic traditions about Dinah's daughter, or an adopted Hebrew child, emerge from Rabbinic Judaism's engagement with perceived gaps in the biblical narrative. Midrash, by its nature, is not primarily concerned with historical documentation, but with extracting meaning and resolving difficulties in the text. As Rabbi Judah Golden explains, Midrash fills in the gaps. Where the Bible is silent, Midrash speaks, not necessarily to record what happened, but to explore what could have or should have happened given the values and theology of Judaism. The Joseph and Asenath text presents different interpretive challenges. While earlier scholars dated it to the 5th or 6th century CE, more recent analysis of language patterns and cultural references suggests a much earlier composition, possibly as early as the 1st century BCE. Fragments discovered among the Cairo-Geniza documents have confirmed its wide circulation in Jewish communities, indicating it was not simply a later Christian invention, but reflected traditions meaningful to ancient Jewish readers. Scholars remain divided about whether the text originated in Jewish or Christian circles. Dr. Gideon Bohak of Tel Aviv University argues for its Jewish origins. The text shows none of the Christological elements we would expect in a Christian composition. Instead, it reflects Jewish concerns about intermarriage and conversion current in Hellenistic Judaism. Others, like Professor John Barclay of Durham University, see evidence of Christian influence in its themes of transformation and new birth. The archaeological evidence provides important context, but no definitive answers. The material culture of the Nile Delta during the Middle Bronze Age, roughly corresponding to the patriarchal period, shows clear evidence of Semitic presence and cultural interchange with Egyptians. However, no inscriptions or artifacts directly mentioning Joseph or Asenath have been discovered. A fascinating recent discovery at Tel el-Daba may offer a tantalizing clue. A high-status residence from the appropriate period contained both Egyptian religious items and a small seal bearing Semitic writing that some scholars have tentatively translated as referring to the House of the Hebrew. While far from conclusive, such findings remind us that the sharp cultural divisions we sometimes imagine in the ancient world were often more fluid in reality. The implications. Each theory about Asenath's origins carries profound implications, not just for how we understand one biblical marriage, but for larger questions of identity, belonging, and the boundaries of community. If Asenath was Dinah's daughter or a Hebrew by birth, it suggests a divine plan working through hidden means, a cosmic symmetry whereby Joseph unknowingly reunites his family by marrying his niece or a lost daughter of his people. It preserves the idea of Israel's separated identity even in this seemingly mixed marriage. If Asenath was truly Egyptian but converted to Joseph's faith, her story becomes one of the earliest and most significant conversion narratives in religious history. It suggests that from its very beginning, the community of faith included those who joined by choice rather than birth. Her transformation foreshadows the later biblical figures of Ruth and Rahab, foreign women who would become part of Israel's lineage and even ancestors in the line of David, and ultimately Jesus. These competing theories reflect more than academic curiosity. They reveal our ongoing struggle with questions of identity, purity, and acceptance. They challenge us to consider: is belonging determined by blood, by belief, or by both? How do we navigate the tensions between maintaining distinct identity and embracing those who come from outside? The mystery of Asenath, this woman at the crossroads of cultures, this forgotten wife whose sons became tribes of Israel, continues to resonate precisely because it touches these universal human questions. As we examine each theory, weighing evidence and implications, we come closer not just to understanding one ancient marriage, but to grappling with the complex interplay of identity and faith that shapes our world to this day. Transformation and Sacred Union, Asenath's spiritual journey. The ancient text Joseph and Asenath offers us a remarkable window into what might have been the most profound transformation in Asenath's life. Her spiritual journey from daughter of a sun priest to wife of a Hebrew patriarch. While not included in the canonical Bible, this narrative paints a vivid picture of internal struggle, spiritual awakening, and ultimate transformation that resonates across centuries and cultures. Picture Asenath, raised in splendor and privilege, the beautiful daughter of Heliopolis' high priest. Her chambers adorned with gold and silver, her wardrobe filled with the finest linen, her status unquestioned. The text describes her as exceptionally beautiful, prideful, and initially contemptuous of Joseph, a foreign man, despite his elevated position in Pharaoh's court. When informed that Joseph will visit her father's house, she initially responds with disdain. "Why should my lord and father give me as a captive to a stranger, a fugitive, and a slave?" But something profound happens when Asenath first sees Joseph. The text describes him arriving in a chariot of gold, dressed in a dazzling white tunic, wearing the royal signet ring and crown of Pharaoh. Yet, it isn't merely his external splendor that affects her. It's something deeper she perceives in him, something that shatters her preconceptions. The narrative tells us, "And Asenath saw Joseph, and she was cut to the heart. And her knees were paralyzed, and her entire body trembled, and she was filled with great fear." In that moment of recognition, Asenath experiences what modern psychologists might call a cognitive dissonance, a profound rupture between her existing worldview and a new reality she suddenly confronts. The man she had dismissed as a slave radiates a spiritual authority and presence she has never encountered before. Joseph, however, maintains his boundaries. Learning that Asenath worships idols, he refuses to kiss her in greeting as would be customary, stating he cannot let the lips that praise the living God touch lips that have blessed, dead and dumb idols. Yet he does something unexpected. He prays for her. "Lord God of my father Israel, the Most High, the Powerful One, bless this virgin, and renew her by your Spirit, and form her anew by your hidden hand, and make her alive again by your life, and let her eat your bread of life and drink your cup of blessing." This prayer catalyzes the central crisis of Asenath's life. After Joseph departs, she retreats to her chamber and experiences a profound spiritual breakdown. The text describes her inner turmoil in vivid emotional terms. "And Asenath was filled with fear and trembled, and she fell on her bed, weak and sick. And she wept with great and bitter weeping, and she repented of her gods she used to worship, and she despised all the idols, and she waited for evening to come." What follows is one of the most dramatic scenes of religious conversion in ancient literature. As darkness falls, Asenath rises from her bed and takes radical action. "And she hurried and took down the idols of gold and silver and threw them through the window. And Asenath took all her royal dinner and the fatted beasts and fish and meat, and threw everything through the window as food for the dogs. And after that she took the ash bin, and poured ash on her head, and fell on the ash, and wept bitterly with great weeping all night." This powerful imagery captures the absolute nature of her rejection of her former life. The golden idols, symbols of wealth and status, are cast aside like garbage. The lavish meal representing her privilege and comfort becomes dog food. Covering herself in ashes, a traditional symbol of mourning and repentance, Asenath physically embodies her internal state of desolation. For 7 days she remains in this state of penitence and fasting. On the 8th day, significant as a symbol of new creation in both Jewish and later Christian tradition, she experiences a mystical vision. A being like Joseph in every respect but with a face like lightning appears in her chamber. This heavenly messenger tells her that her repentance has been accepted, that her name is now written in the book of the living in heaven, and that she has become a bride of the Most High. The messenger gives her honey to eat as a symbol of new life, telling her, "Behold, you have eaten bread of life and drunk a cup of immortality and been anointed with the ointment of incorruptibility." This language of transformation is profound. Asenath hasn't merely changed religions, she has undergone a spiritual rebirth, becoming a new creation. When Joseph returns, he finds a transformed woman. The text tells us, "And Joseph came to the house of Potiphar and entered the court, and they opened the doors for him, and he went in. And when Asenath heard that Joseph had come, she called the overseer of her house and said, 'Hurry and wash the floor where Joseph's feet will step.'" The proud priestess who once scorned the Hebrew slave now humbles herself to wash the floor where he will walk. Their reunion becomes a recognition of shared spiritual identity. Joseph, seeing the change in her, exclaims, "Come near to me, Holy Virgin, for I have had good news about you from heaven, and your name has been written in the book of the living, and it will not be erased forever." Their marriage, then, is presented not as a political arrangement, but as a divinely sanctioned union between two people sharing the same faith. This narrative of spiritual transformation would have powerful resonance for ancient readers. For Jewish communities living in diaspora and navigating questions of intermarriage and conversion, it provided a template for understanding how outsiders could become insiders. For early Christian communities, it foreshadowed themes of rebirth and new creation, central to their theology. The psychological depth of Asenath's journey is remarkable for an ancient text. She moves through distinct emotional stages, from pride and contempt, to shock and confusion, to despair and repentance, and finally to acceptance and joy. This psychological realism suggests the narrative may reflect actual experiences of religious conversion in antiquity, even if the specific details are embellished. Beyond her personal transformation, Asenath's journey has profound implications for her role as mother. When she bears Joseph's sons, their names reflect this spiritual narrative. The firstborn is named Manasseh, meaning causing to forget, because as Joseph says, God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's house. The second son is named Ephraim, meaning fruitful, because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. These names reveal a complex emotional landscape. Manasseh represents a breaking with the past, perhaps not only Joseph's painful memories of betrayal by his brothers, but also Asenath's former identity as a daughter of Egyptian idolatry. Ephraim represents new beginnings and abundance in the present. Together, they embody the paradox of transformation, that it requires both letting go and embracing, both death and rebirth. What makes this transformation narrative particularly compelling is the symmetry it creates with Joseph's own life journey. Joseph, too, underwent a profound transformation, from favored son to slave, from prisoner to ruler. He, too, experienced the death of an old identity and the birth of a new one. In Asenath, he finds not just a wife, but a spiritual counterpart, someone who understands transformation from the inside. Archaeologist William Dever has noted that material evidence from the period shows signs of religious syncretism and adaptation among Semitic peoples living in Egypt. We find household shrines that combine Egyptian and Levantan elements, he writes, suggesting that religious identity was more fluid than texts sometimes indicate. In this historical context, Asenath's transformation appears less as a clean break between two religious systems, and more as a complex process of cultural navigation and spiritual evolution. The story of Asenath's transformation speaks powerfully to the universal human experience of identity crisis and renewal. We all face moments when our established worldviews are challenged, when we must choose between comfortable familiarity and difficult truth. Her courage in abandoning everything she knew for something she barely understood but intuitively recognized as true resonates across centuries and cultural boundaries. Whether we understand Asenath's transformation literally or metaphorically, its emotional power is undeniable. It speaks to our deepest hopes, that we can change, that we can find acceptance, that we can transcend the limitations of our backgrounds and circumstances to become something new. In the spiritual journey of this forgotten wife lies a template for transformation that continues to inspire seekers of truth in every generation. Two tribes from one union. The historic legacy of Asenath. From the union of Joseph and Asenath came two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, whose descendants would grow to become two of the most influential tribes in Israel's history. What began as a seemingly unlikely marriage between a Hebrew patriarch and the daughter of an Egyptian priest produced a legacy that would fundamentally shape the destiny of Israel for centuries to come. The biblical text is remarkably concise about their birth. Before the years of famine came, two sons were born to Joseph by Asenath of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Genesis 41:50-52. These brief verses contain profound emotional and theological significance that would echo through generations. The names Joseph chose for his sons reveal a complex emotional landscape. Manasseh, meaning causing to forget, speaks to healing from past trauma. Joseph's painful separation from his family and his years of suffering as a slave and prisoner. Ephraim, meaning doubly fruitful or fertile, celebrates new beginnings and divine blessing in a foreign land. Together, these names embody the paradox of Joseph's experience. both loss and gain, both exile and triumph. What makes these two sons particularly significant is that, unlike the sons of any other patriarch, they would each become full tribes of Israel in their own right. When Jacob blesses his grandsons in Genesis 48, he performs an unexpected reversal, crossing his hands to give the greater blessing to the younger Ephraim, rather than the firstborn Manasseh. In that pivotal moment he declares, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." Archaeological evidence has provided fascinating insights into the historical impact of these two tribes. Excavations at Tel Dothan, a site in the territory historically associated with Manasseh, have revealed a prosperous settlement during the Iron Age 1200 to 586 BCE, with evidence of sophisticated administrative buildings, storage facilities, and international trade connections. Similarly, excavations at Shiloh, within Ephraim's territory, uncovered remains of what many archaeologists believe was the site of the tabernacle, Israel's central place of worship, before the temple was built in Jerusalem. Perhaps the most dramatic archaeological finding related to these tribes came in 1993, when archaeologists discovered a fragment of a monument at Tel Dan bearing the words "House of David" and "Israel" in ancient Hebrew script. This inscription, dating to the 9th century BCE, provides rare extra-biblical confirmation of the divided kingdoms period, when Ephraim led the northern tribes as a separate political entity from Judah in the south. The scale of influence these two tribes would eventually wield is remarkable. Ephraim, as Jacob predicted, became particularly prominent. Its territory encompassed the central hill country of Canaan, including Shiloh, which served as the religious center of Israel during the time of the Judges. After the division of the kingdom following Solomon's death, Ephraim became the dominant tribe of the northern kingdom, so much so that the prophets often used Ephraim as shorthand for the entire northern nation of Israel. Manasseh, meanwhile, became unique among the tribes by spanning both sides of the Jordan River. Half the tribe settled east of the Jordan in Gilead and Bashan, while the other half occupied territory west of the river between Ephraim and the Jezreel Valley. This geographic division reflected the tribe's role as a bridge between the settled agricultural communities of western Canaan and the more nomadic, pastoral regions to the east. The Samaria Ostraca, a collection of 63 inscribed pottery fragments discovered at Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, dating to the 8th century BCE, provide fascinating evidence of the administrative system within the territory once dominated by the sons of Joseph. Several of these ancient receipts specifically mention deliveries from towns in the regions of Ephraim and Manasseh, demonstrating the continuing identity and importance of these tribal designations centuries after their founding. Professor Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University, a leading archaeologist specializing in ancient Israel, notes, "The material culture associated with the northern tribes, particularly Ephraim and Manasseh, shows distinctive characteristics that differentiate it from Judah in the south. These differences in pottery styles, burial practices, and settlement patterns suggest a strong regional identity that aligns with the biblical presentation of these tribes as influential political entities." This archaeological evidence confronts us with a profound historical reality. From a single marriage, whatever Asenath's origins truly were, emerged two tribal entities that would shape the political, religious, and cultural landscape of ancient Israel for centuries. The sons of Joseph and Asenath would produce not merely family lines, but entire peoples with their own territories, traditions, and historical trajectories. The theological significance of this legacy cannot be overstated. In Jewish tradition, Ephraim and Manasseh become the model for blessing sons, as reflected in the traditional blessing still used by Jewish parents for their boys. "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." They represent success and faithfulness in diaspora, the ability to maintain identity while flourishing in a foreign land, precisely the challenge their parents navigated in their own lives. In Christian theological tradition, the adoption and blessing of Joseph's sons by Jacob has been seen as prefiguring the inclusion of Gentiles into God's covenant. Just as these sons of a potentially Egyptian mother were fully incorporated into Israel, receiving their own tribal inheritances, so too would the nations eventually be grafted into God's people through faith. When we consider Joseph's life as a whole, striking parallels emerge between his story and the later story of Jesus Christ. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold for silver, falsely accused and imprisoned, only to rise to a position where he became the savior of many, including his own family. He forgave those who wronged him and used his position of power to preserve life rather than seek revenge. In this typological reading, Asenath's role takes on additional significance. If she was indeed an Egyptian who converted to faith in the God of Israel, her union with Joseph prefigures the church, the Gentile bride joined to the Messiah, creating a new family that transcends bloodlines. The theologian N.T. Wright observes that the inclusion of the foreign and the outsider within God's family is not a New Testament innovation, but a pattern woven throughout the entire biblical narrative. The mysterious amulet mentioned in Midrashic accounts of Asenath, the golden plate inscribed with God's name that Jacob supposedly placed around her neck as an infant, takes on profound symbolic significance in this light. Whether historical or metaphorical, it represents the divine claim on her life, the mark of belonging that identified her as part of God's covenant people despite appearances to the contrary. This symbolism resonates with the words of the prophet Hosea centuries later, speaking of God's relationship with Israel. "I will write my name on their hearts. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God." The story of Asenath, whether she was Hebrew by birth or Egyptian by conversion, ultimately points to this same truth, that God's family extends beyond the boundaries of birth and blood to include all who are called by faith. The legacy of Asenath through her sons creates a powerful theological statement about identity and belonging that challenges us to this day. If, as some traditions suggest, she was Hebrew by birth but raised Egyptian, her story speaks to the persistent truth of divine calling, even when hidden beneath layers of different cultural identity. If she was Egyptian by birth but chose the God of Israel, her story reminds us that faith transcends ethnicity, that spiritual identity can supersede cultural origin. In either case, through her sons Ephraim and Manasseh, Asenath's impact on the story of God's people was immeasurable. From what appeared to be a politically expedient marriage emerged two tribes that would help define Israel's future. A reminder that the divine plan often works through the most unexpected unions, drawing straight lines with crooked human instruments and bringing forth blessing from what might seem like compromise. The silenced voice, Asenath's erasure and modern relevance. In the retelling of the patriarchs, one name consistently slips through the cracks: Asenath. Despite her pivotal role as the mother of two tribes of Israel, her presence in the biblical narrative is fleeting, a mere footnote in Joseph's story. Her tale is eclipsed, her voice silenced, and her significance diminished. Yet her influence on the tribes of Israel is undeniable. Why has Asenath been erased from common retellings, and what does her marginalization reveal about how we construct sacred history? The erasure of Asenath reflects a broader pattern in ancient religious texts. Women's voices, especially those of foreign women, were often relegated to the margins. In the patriarchal storytelling tradition, men carried the weight of covenant, while women like Asenath were mentioned primarily in relation to their husbands and sons. As biblical scholar Dr. Carol Myers notes, the ancient texts were written by men, for men, about men. Women appear primarily as they relate to men's concerns and male-centered narratives. This silence wasn't accidental. It reflected the selective theological emphasis of the time. A woman who stood at the crossroads of two cultures, whose identity challenged neat categorization, presented complications for a narrative focused on ethnic and religious distinctiveness. Whether Asenath was Egyptian by birth who converted, or Hebrew by blood who returned to her roots, her complex identity didn't fit easily into the binary worldview that would later characterize much of religious thought. Compare Asenath's treatment to other women in Scripture whose stories are told more fully. Sarah's barrenness and eventual motherhood, Rebekah's clever manipulation to secure Jacob's blessing, Rachel's struggle with infertility. These narratives receive detailed attention. What distinguishes these women from Asenath? They were unambiguously Hebrew, their lineage uncomplicated, their place within the covenant clear. Historian Dr. Tikva Frymer-Kensky observes, when women's stories are told in the Bible, they often serve specific theological purposes. Asenath's full story may have been downplayed precisely because it complicated the narrative of Israel's separated identity. In a text concerned with establishing clear boundaries between God's people and others, a foreign woman who becomes the mother of two tribes presented narrative complexity that later editors may have chosen to minimize. The archaeological record offers fascinating insights into this erasure. While excavations have uncovered numerous artifacts relating to Joseph's administrative role in Egypt, storage facilities, seals, and administrative documents, remarkably little material evidence speaks directly to Asenath. Even in the regions associated with her sons' tribes, findings related to their maternal heritage are scarce. It's as if her Egyptian connections were deliberately downplayed in the material culture as well as the textual record. Yet despite this historical marginalization, Asenath's legacy through her sons continued to shape Israel's history. Manasseh and Ephraim became mighty tribes often mentioned in prophecy and historical accounts. In a profound irony, the woman who is barely mentioned in Scripture became the mother of tribes frequently referenced throughout the Bible. As the prophet Hosea would later declare, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." A verse that takes on additional resonance when we remember that Israel's very composition included the descendants of an Egyptian priest's daughter. Asenath's erasure speaks powerfully to contemporary concerns about whose stories are preserved and whose are forgotten. In our divided world, where boundaries of race, culture, and belief often separate us, her story calls us to a deeper truth, that God's redemption knows no boundaries. Her journey, whether as an Egyptian convert or a Hebrew restored to her roots, reveals that the lines we draw between insider and outsider are often more permeable than our theologies admit. Modern religious communities continue to struggle with the same tensions that Asenath's story embodies. Questions of interfaith marriage, conversion, and religious identity remain profoundly relevant. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, reflects, "In Asenath we see the beginning of a theme that runs throughout Jewish history. That to be a Jew is not a matter of race, but of faith. What matters is not where you come from, but where you are going. Not what you were born as, but what you have become." For Christians, Asenath's story resonates with the central New Testament theme that in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, Galatians 3:28. Her acceptance into the covenant family prefigures the later inclusion of Gentiles. As theologian N.T. Wright observes, the story of Joseph and Asenath reminds us that God has always been in the business of breaking down dividing walls of hostility and creating one new humanity. For contemporary women navigating complex cultural and religious identities, Asenath's story provides a powerful historical precedent. Rebecca S. Lesses, professor of Jewish studies at Ithaca College, notes, "The later elaborations of Asenath's story in texts like Joseph and Asenath gave ancient women models for religious agency and spiritual transformation, at a time when women's religious roles were highly constrained. These narratives created space for women's spiritual journeys within patriarchal religious systems." The pattern of erasure that marginalized Asenath continues in modern contexts. Those who stand at cultural crossroads, whose identities are complex or hybrid, still struggle to have their stories heard and valued. Immigrants, converts, those of mixed heritage, all can find in Asenath a reflection of their own experience of navigating multiple worlds while seeking authentic belonging. Modern examples abound. Rebecca Hall, actress and filmmaker, recently shared in her documentary Passing how she discovered her grandfather, a light-skinned black man, had passed as white, cutting off his connection to his racial heritage and creating generational silence about family identity. Like the theories about Asenath's hidden Hebrew origins, such stories reveal how identity can be concealed, transformed, or reclaimed across generations. Similarly, journalist Alex Wagner, of mixed Burmese and American heritage, writes in her memoir Future Face about her quest to understand her complex cultural identity. "I wanted to know where I belonged in the world, and I thought DNA would tell me. But I came to realize that belonging isn't in our genetics. It's something we create through our choices and commitments. This insight resonates powerfully with Asenath's story, regardless of which theory of her origins we accept. Asenath's erasure also speaks to contemporary discussions about historical memory and whose perspectives shape our understanding of the past. As societies worldwide reckon with whose statues stand in public squares, whose names adorn buildings, and whose stories appear in textbooks, the case of Asenath reminds us that selective remembering has always been part of how communities construct their narratives. Perhaps most profoundly, Asenath's story challenges us to reconsider how we draw the boundaries of community. In a world increasingly divided along religious, political, and cultural lines, her life, whether as convert or hidden Hebrew, reminds us that the categories we create are often more rigid than the complex reality of human identity and belonging. What might we discover if we dare to look deeper into the lives of those who are often forgotten? What hidden histories might emerge if we listen for the voices silenced in our religious and cultural narratives? Like archaeologists carefully brushing away sand to reveal ancient artifacts, we might uncover unexpected truths that challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding. The Jewish concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Baze, all Israel is responsible for one another, takes on new meaning when we consider that the very composition of Israel included the descendants of an Egyptian priest's daughter. The boundaries of community have always been more fluid than the gatekeepers of tradition might admit. In the final analysis, Asenath's life reminds us that sometimes the most powerful foundations are built by those who are overlooked. The forgotten stories, the ones that don't fit neatly into our categories, often hold the deepest truths about God's grace and purpose. What if those on the margins, those whose identities challenge our neat categorizations, are actually central to the divine plan? Perhaps it's time we stop overlooking the stories that seem small or insignificant. Asenath, though her life is briefly mentioned in the biblical text, reveals to us a profound truth about transformation, faith, and the unbreakable thread that ties all people to God's covenant, regardless of their background. As we close this exploration of Asenath's story, let us carry forward this challenge to listen for the silenced voices, to seek out the forgotten stories, and to recognize that divine fingerprints often appear in the most unexpected places. For in doing so, we might discover that the boundaries we've drawn between insider and outsider, between us and them, have always been more permeable than we imagined, and that God's redemptive work has always been bigger than the boxes we create to contain it. In the forgotten wife of Joseph, we find not just a historical curiosity, but a mirror reflecting our own questions about identity, belonging, and transformation. And in her erasure and rediscovery, we glimpse both humanity's tendency to simplify complex stories and our persistent hunger to recover the fullness of truth that lies beneath the surface of our sacred narratives. The story of Asenath, whether she was Egyptian by birth who converted or Hebrew by ancestry who rediscovered her roots, speaks powerfully to our modern lives. In our 40s and beyond, many of us find ourselves at crossroads of identity, navigating career transitions, evolving family roles, or questioning long-held beliefs. Like Asenath standing between two worlds, we often struggle with questions of belonging. Where do I fit as I age? What identity defines me when my children leave home or retirement approaches? Her journey reminds us that transformation is possible at any stage of life, that we are never too established in our ways to experience profound change. The erasure of Asenath from popular retellings mirrors how our society often overlooks the contributions of those at life's margins: the older worker, the late-blooming artist, the midlife career changer. Yet her impact, generating two of Israel's most influential tribes through her sons Ephraim and Manasseh, teaches us that our greatest legacy may emerge in ways we never anticipated. What matters isn't recognition in the moment, but the lasting impact of our choices and connections. As we navigate an increasingly divided world, Asenath's story, bridging cultures and faiths, offers hope that boundaries can be crossed, that belonging isn't determined by birth, but by the commitments we make and the love we choose. Her courage to embrace transformation challenges us to remain open to new beginnings, even in life's second half. Remember, the most beautiful chapters of your story may still be waiting to be written, and the boundaries you fear may be more permeable than you imagine. If you've been moved by the forgotten story of Asenath and Joseph, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Has her journey between two worlds resonated with your own life experiences? What aspects of her transformation spoke most deeply to you? Your perspective enriches our community's understanding. Don't miss our upcoming explorations of other forgotten biblical figures whose stories hold profound modern relevance. Subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to be first to know when new content arrives. If you found value in this exploration of identity, belonging, and transformation, please consider sharing this video with friends or family members who might be wrestling with similar questions. Your support through likes and shares helps these overlooked biblical stories reach those who need their message most. Together, we can rediscover the wisdom hidden in the forgotten corners of sacred texts.